We're here in Lebanon, Ohio tonight for a special event called the Invasion of America, and it's being put on by the Warren County Tea Party. And I'm with one of the two speakers, featured speaker tonight, Jane Simpson. James is a highly sought-after, national renowned speaker and author, investigative journalist, and former economist and budget examiner for the White House Office of Management and Budget. Jim, very nice to meet you. And why don't you give the audience a short rendition on what's in store for tonight.
Okay, will do. Well, I recently published a book. It's called The Red-Green Axis, Refugees, Immigration, and the Agenda to Erase America. And that's what it is. We've all seen the floods of refugees teeming into Europe and the innumerable problems they create. We've all become concerned with terrorism following Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino, and many other terrorist attacks that have occurred in this country but have largely flown under the radar. But people haven't missed it. We haven't missed it. We've become very concerned, and with good reason. But what most people don't know is that the refugee agenda has been going on since 1980, when the Refugee Act was passed in its modern rendition. And we have brought in millions of refugees from all over the world, many of whom don't even formally qualify under the definition refugee. And they are squirreled away in small communities, and they overwhelm those communities with problems. And the communities don't have a voice. The mass media rarely, if ever, picks up the problems they create, and legislators and other people either don't know about it, don't care about it, or are being paid off by the contractors who resettle these refugees to keep their mouths shut about it. And it's reached a head. And in this country, we are facing massive problems. It's gone under the radar for a very long time, but now is coming to the surface. And we have problems with terrorists sneaking in under the refugee program. We have innumerable problems with refugees who do not assimilate. They use welfare at rates vastly in excess of what Americans do. And they also bring in all kinds of exotic diseases. And so we're facing a whole host of problems, and I wrote this book to address those problems. And I'm going to be speaking to you tonight about those in great detail. You are going to learn a whole lot about the refugee program, how we are being misled, how there is just an absolute wall of misinformation about this whole issue that's designed to make us say, well, it's okay, or we should allow this, or even this is a good thing that we should be doing. It's wrong on all those counts, but it's going to take a lot to explain because so much misinformation is out there about the refugee program.
Well, Jim, that's very interesting, everything you said, and I really look forward to the presentation tonight when we have a live audience, a chance to ask questions. But let me go ahead and I'll pose one question to you real quick.
Sure.
People out there are going to say, well, you know, Jim and Dave is the type of guys, we just don't like the Muslim people, et cetera, et cetera. How do you address a question like that?
Well, the Muslims bring special problems of their own. But I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about people from all over the world, from throughout Africa, throughout Central America, throughout East Central and West South Asia, all over the world. People speaking hundreds, thousands of different languages. People with no understanding of American the American Constitution, our laws, our culture, our way of life. They don't understand it, and in many cases, they do not want it. They just want to come here and take advantage of the very generous welfare benefits that we provide. Now, the Muslims create a special problem, and I have to say, 95% of the Muslims that come to this country, I don't think are a problem. But that other 5% really, really are. And the trouble that makes Muslims unique is that the political doctrine of Sharia, which they are all supposed to follow, demands that they take over and dominate any country where they immigrate to. In fact, immigration is one of the requirements of all Muslims. It's called the hijrah. Muhammad wanted Muslims to emigrate all over the world. He called it the hijrah, and the purpose is to enter a country and overtake it through peaceful means, but eventually to dominate that country. And we're seeing that happen right here in a number of areas. In Dearborn, Michigan, they don't engage in terrorist acts, but they are driving all non-Muslim businesses out of that city. It's just become basically a Muslim place to live, and if you don't like it, if you're not a Muslim, you don't want to become a Muslim, you don't want to convert, you leave, or you're forced out. And these are not the kind of things we anticipated. These are not the kind of things this country was created to accept and put up with. And we want people to come here who want to assimilate, who want to become part of the fabric of American society and produce and become productive members of our society. And that's what a refugee was required to do before the changes in the law that came about in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, I think Jim's done a good job of explaining stuff, and I'd just like to point out also, Jim, that it's well documented that there's a cottage industry that's been developed all around the world with this whole refugee problem, and of course the focus has been on the Syrian refugees, but I've got a newspaper article right here, Jim.
Right here, talking about smugglers, across the southwest border, some of the smugglers bringing Central Americans and others into this country are making more money doing that than they are smuggling drugs across our southern border. Another thing that people don't know, I went to a conference last fall, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees was the keynote speaker. And he said that Western Europeans and anybody else in the world who thought that there was anything to be afraid of about the Muslims, about the immigrants, or the refugees flooding into Europe or anywhere else, anybody worrying about that, bringing in terrorists, was stupid. This is what he said. They were stupid. He said, and he explained it. He said, the refugees have to pay sometimes as much as $5,000 and go this circuitous route all around through Eastern Europe, sometimes into Russia and over into Germany, right? Well, guess what? Guess who runs many of those networks? ISIS. So if ISIS runs the networks, it follows that ISIS could easily infiltrate some of its people in with the refugee flows. And what better way to do it? ISIS also has a passport manufacturing facility. And two of the terrorists in the Paris attacks were carrying Syrian passports. So that's a serious concern, and this is hilarious. It's really true that smugglers are making tons of money, but they're not the only ones. It's a huge...
Okay, Jim, let me go ahead and why don't you expand a little bit for the audience? And of course, you're going to give the full presentation tonight for everybody, so this is just a little sampling, guys. But why don't you go ahead and dive in a little bit more in depth about who else is making a lot of money besides the smugglers, well documented here in the USA Today. But what other groups are out there making a ton of money off this whole refugee problem?
Well, in the United States, it's almost indescribably huge network. There are 9 primary resettlement contractors. They're called voluntary agencies. They're not voluntary at all. Their acronym is VOLAGs. The 9 VOLAGs include 6 religious and 3 non-religious ones, such as the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Church World Services, Episcopal Migration Ministries, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, International Rescue Committee, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, World Relief, and another one called the Ethiopian Community Development Council. So there are 9 VOLAGs. There are 350 subcontractors. And then there are thousands of subcontractors who feed off the refugee grants available through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So it's not a small deal, it is a massive industry. The Office of Refugee Resettlement alone spends $2 billion a year on it.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. We look forward to the event tonight, the Invasion of America, and I'll look forward to hearing the full presentation, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
and
Dave.
I hope you guys enjoyed this short
Thank you,
video.
Dave. Make sure you make it.